Welcome, this is Media Reporter, and the topic today we'll be discussing is bankruptcy and mortgage foreclosure. I'm your host, Irina Lust, and this is my honored guest, Karamvir Dahiya of Dahiya Law Offices. He's a Harvard graduate, and he is an owner of a bankruptcy law firm, and he will talk with us today on topics of complex bankruptcy topics and mortgage issues. Very nice having you here.
Thank
you
you,
for coming.
thank you for having me here.
So let's start. Can you explain in simple terms what is debt, consumer debt, why one should file for bankruptcy, and how bankruptcy plays into this whole picture?
Well, bankruptcy is a federal relief. What happened was initially each state was sovereign government. We have dual sovereign system. So the state had their own insolvency system. And the relief from one state is not effective on the other states. So the Congress decided that they must have a system wherein they can have centralized forum for disputes with all the creditors, marshaling the assets at one place, and the creditors to be paid from one pool of assets, one place. Centralizing it, this is how the federal government came up with this idea of federal bankruptcy. So this is what, it's a legal process.
So I often hear this term, fresh start. Could you elaborate on that? What does that mean to a person sitting at home thinking, should I file for bankruptcy? What types of relief exist? What is it?
Well, fresh start is as if you have no debts. You start anew. You start fresh. You don't have the burden and you don't have the burdensome, excessive obligations that you cannot pay back, repay your debts as they accrue. That's the reason and the time that you seek relief from the federal government. What do? You file a bankruptcy petition and you seek to discharge your debts. You tell them, listen, I can't pay anymore. I'm done. Give me a chance. Probably I'm going to start. I'll be a good citizen. I'll be more productive. The idea in our capitalist system is that you're more productive if you're let free to operate and to conduct your business, invest your business without any fear. Because those civilizations, countries, the system, which does not forgive the debts of the individuals, they never do well. So it's basically boasting the capitalist structure of this country. It's productive for one, it's productive for everyone.
So can you discharge any kind of debt?
Of course, all kind of debts could be discharged. However, the list of debts that cannot be discharged is getting bigger.
Could
The
you give
reason
us
is
some
simple.
examples?
Yeah, I mean, the example is child support, criminal restitutions, certain tax liabilities. So there's certain debts the government feels they are so important. They're morally important. Paying your taxes is a morally important obligation. So is a child support. So something that is morally tied to your obligation, that is not dischargeable. What is a morality? That is enumerated under Section 523 of the Bankruptcy Code. These are the debts. If you lied to obtain credit, that also cannot be discharged. So we have those things, the list, the inventory, what is dischargeable, non-dischargeable,
But
is
what
kind
can
of
you
different.
discharge? Can you tell people what can be discharged?
Well, any private loans can be discharged. Money borrowed to start a business can be discharged. Money borrowed to buy clothes, consumer goods, business, anything can be discharged. What can be discharged is a big list. What cannot be discharged is a specific small list.
But I heard certain types of tax liabilities could be discharged. There is a way around it. Could you tell us more? How you
Well, the
approach
state tax liabilities can be discharged at any stage. All right. Withholding, that cannot be because that was never your money to start with. You're keeping sales tax. You are keeping the money in trust, so that's not dischargeable. The money that you owe, money that you made and you owe, not the trust fund money, that is dischargeable provided it is an old debt. The reason is simple. The government didn't want you to, made money and you file bankruptcy, you never pay. No. Government gives you time, 3 years. Then only it entitles you to file for bankruptcy to discharge your debt. You can file bankruptcy anytime.
So what kinds of bankruptcies exist?
Well, we have a bankruptcy code under Title 11 of the United States Code. And that we have certain chapters. They're old, Chapter 1, Chapter 3, Chapter 5.
What are the main
Chapter
ones that people should know
Yeah,
about when
people should
considering
know that
bankruptcy?
basically there's Chapter 12 for farmers, then there's Chapter 13 for people, homeowners, people with regular small businesses, income. Then there's Chapter 7, you can't make payments. Then there's Chapter 11 for people and corporations involved in business.
So when a client comes to your office, how do you decide which chapter you'll be putting them under?
We'll look at the need of the client. If there is something to structure and retain, for example, you're losing a house in foreclosure. You want to keep the house and pay them over a period of time. So what do you do to reinstate the mortgage? You do a Chapter 13 or Chapter 11.
Okay, but isn't it true you can also keep your house under Chapter 7 under certain circumstances using
Well, you
exemption?
can always keep the Chapter 7. Under Chapter 7, you can keep any property provided it is exempted under the New York State law, for example.
But could you tell us more? For instance, can husband and wife, they have a house on Long Island. They're contemplating filing for bankruptcy. Can they keep the house?
Yes, they can keep the house. If there's no equity, they can keep the house. And if there's an equity, but the equity does not exceed $300,000, they can still keep the house.
Okay, that's very interesting. So tell me more, how one can file for bankruptcy? How does one qualify?
Well, one needs to be an entity or a human being to file for bankruptcy.
Can you be, if you're here illegally, can you file?
Absolutely.
Is there any impact on your immigration
Absolutely
status?
not. Anyone, even a tourist, anyone can file bankruptcy here. The only thing they need is your certain debts to discharge. So even an illegal immigrant can do it. There is the relief. It's kind of, you cannot deny someone a federal relief just because someone does not have a status.
Because I
There's
imagine,
certain things, kind of, for example, Medicaid and all this, the government-sponsored benefits. This is not a government-sponsored benefit in the sense it is between two private parties. The government can regulate that bounty, that disbursement, what government is disbursing. Here, the government is by force, by compulsion of law, is bringing two people together, a lender and a borrower, telling them, listen, let it go. Give this guy a chance. He can't pay. So it can be discharged.
what about if a person lives in a rent-stabilized apartment? What happens in bankruptcy?
Nothing happens in bankruptcy. Well, a rent-stabilized apartment, then the rent-stabilized apartment it's a very beautiful thing in New York City. Rents are expensive, very expensive. You know, not everyone is son of God. Birds have nest, foxes have holes, but son of God does not know where to lay his head. The problem is, human beings need a house. They need to live in Manhattan, East Village, West Village. So they are lucky if they get an apartment which is rent stabilized. The rent is regulated.
But you would be
The
afraid
parties are
to
not
lose
free
it.
to get into, like, how much a rent stabilized apartment. The landlord cannot say, I want to charge you $5,000. No, you're not free. You're controlled. However, that apartment, he might be renting it to you for $1,500, but that apartment might have a market value of like $6,000. Like Cindy Lauper was occupying an apartment, rent stabilized for a long time.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there was a big fight about it. Woman made so much money.
Did she keep it? at that
No, then there was a fight that finally she gave up. So what happens in bankruptcy is the lease become a property of the state. The bankruptcy trustee can marshal the lease, toss it out from the rent stabilized market, sell it.
Okay. What about couples of same sex? Can they file for bankruptcy? It's
They
a
can
hot
file
topic
for
right now. And
Well,
I
of
would
course
like
they
to
can
know.
file it. You mean to say, like, can they file as a couple?
As a couple.
Yes.
Where?
Yes, they
in
can.
New York?
Yeah, anywhere, wherever it's recognized,
Is
the
it
state.
recognized in New York?
It's
Parts
recognized.
of New York?
So yes, people of the same, same sex can, as a couple, they can file bankruptcy. Now the only thing that was an obstruction was DUMA, Defense of Marriage Act. But that is under challenge, and I believe the U.S. government has acquiesced in, and they don't want to challenge that. They said, let it go. It is not constitutional. It's a form of discrimination. So we had a case recently wherein a couple of the same sex, they filed for bankruptcy before Judge Cecilia Morris. She allowed it
Okay,
in Southern District, yes.
that is an interesting decision.
Of course, the times are changing. Things have to change.
And can husband and wife file together? And what is the benefit filing as a couple?
Benefit is nothing. It's administrative convenience. You don't have to pay filing fees twice. You can. That's the reason. There's not much of a benefit other than this.
Okay. So I have another question. Hurricane Sandy happened, and as you know, a lot of people still troubled. They're trying to save their houses, and they're in a lot of debt. So can you tell us the impact of the hurricane and how bankruptcy could potentially help people in the housing market?
Well, you know, it's the bankruptcy code has not come up with any special ad hoc relief in order to pander specifically or to meet this exigency created. The bankruptcy, which is there with or without these catastrophical events, can be of great help. I mean, naturally, you have debts, you're scrambling, you know, you just, life is scattered, you put the pieces together.
But how
And
does bankruptcy help?
bankruptcy is not going to help. The only way bankruptcy can help is pay back your debts.
What
In
about-
how? You don't pay them, you discharge your debts.
What if you got FEMA assistance? Will that be taken in bankruptcy?
No, that will not be taken. No. You can definitely, for example, you're not paid the mortgage payments, you've not been working. A lot of folks have daily wages, so it's a great benefit to them.
I know you do a lot of mortgage foreclosures, defense, you do lien modifications, mortgage modifications, stripping second mortgages. Could you tell how the process works? What is it about? What do you think about mortgage market in general right now?
There are too many questions. Anyway, let's start with the last question. What do I think about the mortgage market? Mortgage market is melting. Evaporated, it's evaporating too. And you can see the smoke everywhere. People, companies filing for bankruptcies. Lehman Brothers. Companies that were thriving on securities market based on mortgage securities, they kind of tanked. And we are trying to find a balance because it was realized that the mortgage securities were not, productive enough, that they were not properly valued. And so there's a big problem in this because a lot of people were sold subprime loans.
Okay,
And the
so what
teaser rates-
happens? You have a subprime loan, you can't pay. What do?
What happens is, in order to induce people to buy a bad loan, they were given teaser rates. They were given, for example, they'll say, pay interest only for 5 years. And after that, suddenly you have to pay $4,000 or $5,000 a month. Or say interest rate 3%, and then it's going to go 7%. So people were kind of misled into it. I don't think anyone who's intelligent enough had gotten into teaser rate, our mortgages. They're kind of a terrible mistake a lot of people made.
But what do you do? How do you get out of it? How do you fix it?
Well,
Can you help?
the way to do is to challenge the underwriting. Say you're a victim of predatory lending. There's certain laws. For example, we have in 2003, we had New York Banking Law 6L, wherein the borrowers are given special rights. If the loan happens to be a high-cost loan, you're supposed to give extra disclosures. And there's certain penalties. No prepayment default, interest rate to change or go double after default. Those things are not there if it is covered in New York Banking Law 6L. The interesting part of New York Banking 6L is it applies to both the purchase and to refinance. Whereas the Truth in Lending laws and HOOPA, Home Equity Protection Act, Home Ownership and Equity Protection Act, applies only to a loan. That is, when you already have a house and you're kind of refinancing, you picked up an equity loan. So New York banking law 6L is an effective tool, very underutilized.
But what do? You have your house, you have bad loan. How do you go about it?
Well, you
Can
have
you
to,
explain in simple terms?
in simple terms, you have to see the first simplicity is to take an understanding, try to understand what the agreement is, what the loan is. What were you told by the broker? What were you told by the bank? What it turns out to be. The problem is you're told something else, but once you start paying, you get a bill after a couple of years, and the loan is something else. It morphs into something else, and you're taken by surprise. That is the time you get the help of a good lawyer. Go through the numbers.
Okay, and then you can sue broker,
And then you
bank.
sue. Yes, sue breach of like contract, and there's several theories you could do it. I mean, to check predatory lending, there's several ways.
How successful are those claims usually in your experience?
Usually, what happens is when you sue a lender, this subprime lending, once they're sued, they will settle with you. They'll revise the mortgage.
And then you will have your monthly payment much lower amount, right?
Absolutely.
So tell me about having two mortgages, larger mortgage and smaller mortgage. I heard in bankruptcy you can wipe out the second mortgage entirely. Could you explain?
Yes, what happens is you're allowed in the bankruptcy to pay to the creditor to the tune of the underlying equity. They value the house. For example, you got a house, you got it for $500,000, and the first loan is $400,000. The second loan is $100,000, but the value of the house is $350,000 now, $350,000. So you can always expunge the second loan because the value of the house has gone down.
But
so the
you
first
only do
mortgage
through
is covering.
bankruptcy? You can only do it through bankruptcy,
Absolutely.
right?
The only thing yes, there's a section 506 in the bankruptcy code that helps you to evaluate the value. It values the property, and then it gives you certain rights to expunge the extra baggage. Only that money needs to be paid, whatever the value of the house is. Not the contract money, but the value of the house.
Very, very interesting. Could you tell us more, what are the actions people can take with bad mortgages and loans?
Well, the first thing you need to do is file a letter under RESPA called Qualified Written Request, wherein you make demands on the lender to send you a list, entire breakdown, the money you've been sending, how much is applied to the escrow, where is money going? Is there any late payments and all? This is the first thing you do. Second thing you do is, as told earlier, you look into the mortgage and the note. Find out who's holding the note. What happened? Find out if you're a victim of predatory lending or not. So look into this paperwork. Then you find there are grounds, hire a lawyer. And you seek a relief.
And you usually get successful if there is...
Usually, judges are very inclined to grant consumers the benefit. And if it is a jury case, you're definitely going to get some extra money too. Yeah.
So can you tell us more about bankruptcy process itself? Because it's so intimidating, and a lot of people put stigma on it. Oh, I can't file bankruptcy, it's embarrassing.
Well, bankruptcy is a strategy. There's no stigma to it. You know, a lot of lawyers, a lot of big companies, business people, Donald Trump, they file for bankruptcy. The companies have filed for bankruptcies. So bankruptcy is basically nothing. It's like going to a boot camp. You become lean and mean for a second. You change. You pledge to change.
Well, what are the caveats people should know before filing bankruptcy? For instance, you have some money in the bank and you're about to file bankruptcy and you think, well, let me give this money to my son or my daughter. What is allowed, not allowed?
Well, what happens is this is called fraudulent conveyance. If you are filing for bankruptcy and you get, let's say, $15,000 in your bank account and you need to pay $75,000 to your credit cards, can you file bankruptcy? You can file bankruptcy, yes, no one stops you. However, the $15,000 you had, you can't keep that money. There's an exemption that you could do. Money out of the exemption, not covered under exemption, has to be paid to the estate, to the trustee. If you give it to your mom, definitely the trustee is going to pursue the money, and it's likely that you're exposing your mother to being a defendant in a lawsuit.
I see.
So you have to be careful.
Can bankruptcy stop eviction proceeding or wage garnishment?
Absolutely. What bankruptcy does is it provides a stay. No proceedings to be allowed against the debtor under no circumstances, any circumstances. It stops all legal proceedings, all kind of proceedings. That's Section 362 of the Bankruptcy Code.
And then how long does bankruptcy take? Usually on average.
Well, the bankruptcy is, it depends on how gifted the lawyer is. Some lawyer makes a bankruptcy petition in 15 minutes. Some take 15 days. So depending on what the situation is and how forthright and honest the debtor is. So if you have all the information, prepare 15, 20 minutes, prepare it, talk to him, understand the case, and do an electronic filing. And
what documents you need to, if you're doing it per se or you're doing it with a lawyer, what documents you need to have?
Well, you need to get
file?
the ID, photocopy of the ID and social security card. Very
What if you
important.
don't have social security card?
Well, then you need something else showing the social security number. Or you don't need a social security number to file bankruptcy. You're not required. Law doesn't say that you need social security. Otherwise, imagine a foreigner, how can he file for bankruptcy?
That's true.
Some form of ID is always useful.
So what other documents you need to collect?
Nothing, a list of the creditors, list of assets and liabilities, that's all.
And then what happens? Bankruptcy is filed, and what is the next step?
Bankruptcy is filed, you get a letter, you have to meet the, this is called meeting with creditors. You go there and speak to the trustee.
And what is trustee? Can you
Trustee is
tell
a
us?
lawyer like you and me.
It's not a judge because-
No, he's not a judge. A judge is not allowed to preside over the meeting. A trustee is going to examine you, ask you questions.
So
What's your name?
So I go to trustees meeting. Will I have to meet the judge later on?
No, there's no meeting with the judge unless the trustee starts a proceeding against you. Then you see the judge.
Okay.
It's more of an administrative proceeding. Government is
And what
involved.
questions are usually asked at creditors meeting?
Questions are asked is like, what's your name? What do you have? What you don't have? Where's the money? It's all tracking the proceeds.
Okay, so it's, do you usually go with your clients?
Yes. A lawyer should always accompany his clients.
So tell us some interesting case in your practice that you love, that happened to you.
No, the interesting cases are, I had this man once, I still remember Mr. Robert Gelger was the trustee. My client had some problem, I believe between the years there's some liquid wherein if you kind of twist your head, if your liquid is displaced, you lose balance. And, he was trying to emphasize a point, and Gelger is a little bit, Mr. Gelger was hard of hearing, and he said, what? So he kind of shook his head. The liquid in his ears kind of shifted, and the guy kind of collapsed. I had to pick him up. And that was the end of the interview, and everything went well after that.
Great.
And that's an interesting side. However, the interesting questions can arise when situation gets difficult. For example, you trusted someone, you gave money, and the person ran away, and he went in bankruptcy. Where is that person who took the money? The government can say, well, you're trying to, that's a ploy. No one ran away with the money. Husband and wife, they're filing bankruptcy together, but then they stop cooperating with the trustee.
What happens if husband and wife get divorced in bankruptcy? What happens?
Well, there's a conflict then. The same lawyer cannot represent both the parties.
Can you file if you're separated from your spouse?
Yes, you can still, the law doesn't say that you have to be living together in harmony. No, it doesn't say that.
As long as you're legally married? You
As
can
long
still
as you're
file?
married.
Okay. And tell me more about credit, because a lot of people are very wary to file bankruptcy. They think that their credit history will be destroyed. Is that true?
Well, the credit history, it's a hard hit on the credit history. It's a hard hit only for 3 months. But then what happens is the credit score shoots up, because you have to understand that the burden is not there. So all the debts are discharged, the balance is zero, and it shoots up the credit. Usually people who are bankrupt, the credit score is better than non-filers.
How fast does it go up?
6 months.
6 months?
Yeah.
And what can you do to improve your credit? Are there any ways?
Be nice to the creditors. Start making payments. That's all.
And can you buy a house after bankruptcy?
Absolutely.
What do you have to do to qualify?
Well, your credit history has to be good. Just because you're going to bankruptcy, they can't discriminate. There's a section in the bankruptcy code which says you cannot discriminate against someone who just filed for bankruptcy.
Another question, can you be fired if you file for bankruptcy?
That's a serious crime. Not a crime as such, but you could be penalized. There was Bank of America had bank employee, Bank of Boston at that point, filed bankruptcy, and they realized that filed for bankruptcy. They put him in the basement, and that was a lawsuit against the bank, and then they finally.
Okay, well, this was very informative. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but Mr. Dahiya, Karamvir Dahiya, thank you very much for joining us and explaining bankruptcy process in detail. And I'm your host, Irina Lust, and we appreciate your advice and input.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.